Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling something really quite serious. It's a topic that's caused a lot of concern, actually. We're looking closely at a statement, a really controversial one, from Manuel Pedrero. You might know him from his pretty provocative YouTube content. And just to set the stage, our sources for this, well, they come from someone deeply troubled by this kind of talk. Specifically, a migrant father. He has 2 daughters. And his worry, his very personal concern about the rhetoric we're going to discuss, that's really why we felt we had to do this deep dive. So this isn't just academic for us, it's serious.
Yeah, and that concern is, well, it's completely understandable. It's justified. Our goal here today, it's not about arguing opinions or, attacking freedom of speech. Pedrero has certainly used his platform freely. What we need to do is analyze, really break down the specific statement he made. Because, look, it's not some thoughtful geopolitical analysis, not at all. It's, frankly, a dangerous populist tactic. It's misogynistic, and it's built to stir up hatred and, crucially, put vulnerable communities at risk. We really want to focus on the impact of these words.
Okay, so what exactly did he say? This comes from his YouTube channel, Datos Duros Podcast. It's about, an hour and 37 minutes into an interview. He says, and this is the quote, "Los mexicanos estamos ganando la guerra en la cama. Y eso es lo que los tiene tan enojados."
Which translates to, Mexicans are winning the war in bed, and that's what makes them so angry. But you really need the full context to get the full picture. He follows up saying, que vamos a recuperar Texas, Nuevo México y California exactamente de la misma forma en como la perdimos. Meaning that we're going to recover Texas, New Mexico, and California exactly the same way we lost them. Dejamos que esos cuates vinieran acá, se multiplicaron, y la perdimos. So we let these guys come here, they multiplied, and we lost them. And it's really important to add, he uses the slang term cochar here. It's a vulgar way to say to screw or to have sex, specifically referring to women. And then claims gringos, that derogatory term for Americans, have stopped doing so. It's loaded, very intentionally loaded.
Right, so let's unpack that, this reconquest idea. He's not talking guns and soldiers, he's talking demographics.
Exactly. Demographic. His logic, if you can call it that, has 2 parts. First, he points to what he claims is a higher birth rate for people of Mexican origin in the U.S. and contrasts that with supposedly falling birth rates among white Americans. Second, he talks about ongoing migration, saying it boosts the Mexican cultural presence, the numbers in those states. Basically, a numbers game fueled by birth and migration.
Okay, so following that line of thinking, where does he end up? What's the conclusion for Pedrero?
His conclusion is that this demographic shift, this tide, will eventually, inevitably lead to a political change. And that change will reverse the loss of territory from back in 1848, like rewriting history through population growth.
Wow, that's quite a claim.
It is. But let's be very clear. This isn't serious analysis, not geopolitical, not sociological. It's just... well, it's an irresponsible populist talking point. There's no real data, no serious research that backs up this kind of conclusion, especially framed like this. It's purely designed to provoke a reaction.
Which seems to fit a pattern, right? You mentioned his modus operandi. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, this is kind of his thing. He uses this type of shocking, overly simplistic language again and again on his channel. Doesn't really matter the topic. We've seen him, stir controversy around very sensitive things like an alleged rape case involving a lawyer, making things worse for the victim, or spreading baseless rumors about a businessman. It really looks like the goal is controversy for controversy's sake, to get clicks, shares, engagement, monetization.
So the phrase winning the war in bed, using that vulgar term kochar, it fits right into that playbook.
Perfectly. It's deliberately crude, it's sexist, it's simple, it sticks in your head, it makes people angry, or maybe proud, depending on who's listening. It's tailor-made for short, shareable clips on social media. It guarantees a reaction. That's the currency he seems to operate in, not reasoned debate.
And it creates that really strong us versus them feeling, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It draws a very sharp line. Us, Mexicans, portrayed as, virile fertile with historical claims, and them, the gringos, painted as decadent, unproductive. It's classic populist division.
Which must have a dual effect then. Loyalty from some, but also anger and resentment from others.
Exactly. It builds loyalty within his nationalist base, sure, but it also stokes hatred. It plays on the frustrations that migrants and their families, might already feel living with so much uncertainty in the U.S. It pours fuel on that fire.
And you can't ignore the appeal to, pride, maybe, and even revenge, that historical wound of losing territory. It's deep in the Mexican consciousness.
Oh, definitely. It taps right into that. It offers this, fantasy of payback that feels easy, almost effortless. No need for armies, just biology, supposedly. It makes a certain part of his audience feel empowered, like history is finally turning their way. It turns a historical grievance into this feeling of inevitable demographic victory.
Okay, but let's pivot.
Yeah.
Because this whole idea, this
Yeah.
thesis, it completely ignores some huge factors, right?
Yep.
What's the biggest hole in his argument?
The absolute biggest glaring oversight is cultural assimilation. Pedrero just skips right over it. The children, the grandchildren of Mexican immigrants, second, third generations, they often primarily identify as American. English is usually their first language. Their goals, their aspirations, they're rooted in American life. Their connection to Mexico is often more cultural, more about family heritage than political allegiance.
Right. That completely changes the picture he's trying to paint.
It completely undermines it. And that's what makes his rhetoric so irresponsible, actually dangerous, because it ignores how people actually live, how identities actually evolve in those communities. And this leads to something even more disturbing in his vision: the way women are portrayed, or rather, how they aren't portrayed as individuals. In Pedrero's narrative, Mexican and Mexican-American women, they don't seem to have agency, no right to choose, no personal goals, no identity outside of this function. They're basically reduced to, well, uteruses at the service of a masculine nationalist project. That's the chilling phrase that comes to mind.
So men are the soldiers, the strategists.
Right. Men are the ones winning the war, and women, they're just the passive territory where this battle takes place. Their consent, their decisions about their own bodies, their futures, completely irrelevant in his framework.
That's incredibly dehumanizing. And it feels like it echoes some really dark history.
It absolutely does. And this is where it gets truly horrifying. Pedrero seems completely unaware, or maybe he doesn't care, that historically, mass rape, mass sexual violence has been a weapon of war. It's been used deliberately to humiliate enemies, destroy their social structure, contaminate their bloodline, so to speak. It's horrific. So when he talks about winning the war in bed in the U.S. using that kind of language, he's essentially, even if unintentionally, making an apology for what amounts to a crime against humanity. The framing is just chillingly close.
And the parallel you mentioned earlier, it's the exact same logic used by the far right in the U.S., just flipped, the Great Replacement theory.
Precisely. It's the same tune, just a different singer. And the danger is the same, fundamentally. When you frame migration as a demographic war, you strip migrants of their humanity. They stop being individuals, people seeking safety or opportunity, and they become invaders, soldiers. And that kind of language, it directly feeds xenophobia. It justifies anti-immigrant policies. It contributes to the real-world violence and discrimination the Hispanic community faces every day in the U.S. It's not just words.
It might sound powerful, maybe even validating, to a certain audience listening to his podcast.
Sure, in that echo chamber, it sounds like strength, like vindication. But out here, in the real world, it's a dangerous fantasy. And the tragic irony is that it actually fuels the very xenophobic movements he claims to oppose. It puts the community he supposedly champions in more danger. This isn't analysis, it's agitation, plain and simple.
So wrapping this up, let's be really clear again. This deep dive wasn't about shutting down Pedrero's right to speak. He's clearly done that. Our focus was to expose what this really is, and attempt to sell an idea that Mexican men can somehow humiliate white American men who he paints as, less masculine, less fertile, and that this somehow leads to winning back lost land. It's a narrative built on humiliation and a distorted view of history and biology.
And truly, the most dangerous part, the most alarming thing, is the attempt to plant this idea that women's bodies are just tools, pawns in a game played between groups of men, a way for one group to exert power, to humiliate another, erasing women completely as individuals and reducing them to symbols. That's fundamentally misogynistic and deeply concerning.
And I just want to bring it back personally to why we did this, drawing from our source. As a father, thinking about his daughters, the horror of them encountering someone who thinks this way, someone who might see them not as people, but as part of some demographic strategy, that fear, that protective instinct, that's really what drove this conversation today. It's personal.
So we leave you with this question to think about. When this kind of rhetoric starts spreading, what's our responsibility as individuals, as a society? How do we critically look at not just the words, but the history they echo, the real harm they can cause, especially to vulnerable people? And how do we make sure that dealing with historical pain leads to understanding and progress, not these dangerous fantasies about a war in bed?
Thank you for joining us for this important deep dive.